Dr. Richard Allen Miller. Welcome back to Nature of Reality Radio. Having guests on this show a second time is a rarity, as I have often made a mission out of trying to get a different guest on every week to keep my show as impartial and informative as possible to give everyone out there who's worthy of coming on my show a chance. But if someone asks to come on again, as you did, I am always willing to answer the call. So it's great to have you on again. I have listened to a great many of your interviews, and you have a lot of wisdom and knowledge. And with that being said, I think, of course, the last interview, if anybody is not familiar with you, I'm not really going to ask you to give an intro about your bio and all that, because check out the last interview if you want to do that, but you really need no introduction with all the things you've done. So without further ado, I will shut my 3.14-inch pie hole and let you talk about whatever it is that you would like to talk about, because, again, you said there are things that you feel are worth discussing. Since that last interview, and whatever those things are, you can babble away about those important things all you want. We've only got an hour now, so without further ado, go ahead.
Babbling on. Well, that's a good word, babble.
Like
just from the Bible. Here we are. And I don't want to be a doom and gloomer, but let's start with the weather. And the fact that Jet Propulsion Laboratory, suspicious observers, everyone is now confirming this will most likely be the worst winter in recorded history in North America. Whether or not that's true, nobody knows. It's like the weatherman, trying to guess. But because of the solar minimum and because of other indicators, we're in for it, pretty much. What do you think?
Well, I can certainly believe that, considering that there hasn't been global warming well, like 3 years ago, I saw an article saying there hasn't been global warming in 15 years. I don't know if
I have to say something about the global warming. I actually met Gore for 3 days when Clinton was up in Portland, Oregon, meeting with Spotted Owl during his administration. Gore was actually interviewing me to be on his cabinet because of Tony Van Zandt. He had recommended me. And Gore and his global warming, I would say that Gore is probably the first fortune made off of that nonsense. There's no such thing as global warming. It's not that at all. In fact, I don't feel like it's very warm out there at all. What do you think? I mean, it's terrible.
I'm the kind of guy that can actually wear short sleeve shirt and no shoes in 50-degree weather easily. I've tried to discipline myself to be accustomed to that, and here it's still November. I'm still walking through nature in that, and people look at me like, well,
where are you looking, by the way?
Yeah, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania suburbs.
Really, yeah. I did graduate work back in Boston and Newark. I was at the University of Delaware, just across the river from Philadelphia, and it's already got snow back there, and there's snow up in Canada. Jet Propulsion Laboratory says that by 2024 there will be parts of Canada that are uninhabitable. Now, what is actually happening? Nobody really understands or knows, but with the global warming, global cooling, there is no question that the ocean currents are going to have to reboot. That's a fact because of the saline levels of the ocean. And so with that said, we do have a day after tomorrow happening. Whether or not there's going to be earthquakes, we're now experiencing quite a few of them. When I was up in Canada last year, I was notified by my bunker. I run a bunker for the military. I'm 76 years old. I'm a GS-18, which means I run this particular bunker as captain and commander. I don't report to anybody above me, including the President of the United States. I have complete autonomy on this bunker. My bunker has infrared. And I saw 2 lava strikes in the Northern Territories above BC during those fires, and I saw 1 lava strike in the Trinity Alps last year. And a buddy of mine that has a bunker further into the Midwest has tomography, and he saw a lava underground from Yellowstone as far as Ohio, and that was last year. Now, the fires that are happening in California right now may be part of the geoengineering spraying of aluminum oxide. The trees are all coated with that crap. And with that said, any kind of a fire is going to burn way hotter than a normal forest fire. And Paradise, I live in Grants Pass, Oregon, and we had refugees that came up here from Oregon, from Paradise, because that so-called laser blue light that everybody was seeing on the videos basically is a bandwidth when a smart meter goes unstable and explodes to the next smart meter. And what you had in Paradise was 10,000 smart meters all going off in concert, one setting off the next. And that now, with scientists, has become so serious a consideration. We are putting it as 10 times more dangerous than detonating a nuclear warhead in the atmosphere for a firestorm. Now, that's your 5G technology. What will happen ultimately is that 5G will most likely become outlawed or prohibited. Certain towns around Paradise right now are actually, in fact, inhibiting or prohibiting that technology. Kotati, there are several counties in Oregon, like Curry County, where it's illegal. And what will most likely happen is once it's outlawed, like it has been in several countries already, there will be a recall, and you'll have to pay to have it removed, just like you had to pay to not have it put on. It's crazy. And that's one of the reasons why PG&E has claimed no contest. Ultimately, I don't know what's ultimately going to happen with California, except that I know that there is a move within the legislature to split the state into two parts and give part of it, the northern part, to China.
Giving anything in America to China is never.
Well, we have a trade deficit.
Yes,
in Grants Pass, where I live, right now, China owns 50% of Grants Pass, Oregon. And I'm not even talking about the timber.
Yeah, and with Donald Trump showing that he seems to have a problem with trading with China, I really don't know what to make of what we can expect in the future.
In that regard, I'm going to make another statement. Mm-hmm. I did not vote for Trump. I voted against Clinton, to realize that our president is supposed to be the most scholarly and morally correct. What has happened to the candidates? Even Bernie Sanders is an embarrassment.
Of course, socialism doesn't work in the real world where money is involved.
It's terrible, yeah.
Yeah, maybe it'll work in a planet where there's no money and technology is not suppressed, then maybe socialism would work rather nicely because everybody would get what they need and then some, but that's not the way we are on planet Earth at the moment. So, like it or not, capitalism is the way to go, but it has so many flaws it's not even fun.
Cyndi Lauper, money changes everything. And how did Madonna put it? I'm a materialistic girl. It's our downfall because right now, there is no Republican or Democratic Party. It's basically a bunch of globalists versus a bunch of nationalists. And I don't know if you knew this or not, but when Matt Stein was still alive, we had a Russian handler from Putin because we were considered assets. Putin is a nationalist and probably has done more for his country as a leader than anyone in their history. Now, he's a criminal, just like all of them are, but he's a nationalist. And it was Edgar Cayce that said it will be the bear that probably saves America. Basically, our handler was the one that got Matt Stein and I to begin urban survival skill workshops and the Sustainable Lifeboat Program, where we have a network of lifeboats throughout North America for people to refuge during this upcoming series of events.
Thank you. And since you mentioned Putin, I would like to elaborate on that for just a moment about whether or not he may have actually had a change in attitude after the whole Snowden leak thing. It's interesting how after the whole Snowden leak thing, Vladimir Putin, after giving Snowden asylum, did actually tell Edward Snowden that he does not want him to reveal anything bad about America, which seems counterintuitive because he's supposed to be against America. But as David Icke made very clear in his in a report that he released shortly after that incident, he asked why would Vladimir Putin insist Snowden not make America look bad when he is Putin would love America to look bad. Well, the answer is because he's a puppet who answers to the same powers that be who control the people and the politicians in America that he opposes. However, it's interesting that ever since then, there's been a lot of people saying that Putin may have had a change of heart, and I've even heard some people go as far as suggesting that Vladimir Putin may have actually had his own Valiant Thor type incident where benevolent ETs approached him after that Snowden incident and said, look, Putin, could you please wise up and not make the same mistake Eisenhower did when he ignored Valiant Thor's warning to suppress nuclear technology and everything. He said, we're giving you another chance because we can't trust America, so we're giving you the opportunity now, and could you please maybe have a change of heart for a change? And well, maybe he has actually been a little bit more noble, even though he's, as you said, a criminal. He's been more of a nationalist and seems to have cared more ever since he gave Snowden asylum and seems to have retracted from that mentality of I don't want Snowden to make America look bad because I answer to the people who control America. So do you think maybe there is some truth to that some force out there may have had him?
I don't know much about the alien connection. I'm out of that loop in that during the 70s when I was in the know, I was basically working in paranormal studies because at that time we were more concerned. We knew about aliens, but we were more concerned with what Russia was doing. And it turns out, that was with Nikita Khrushchev. Remember those days? Banging his shoe on the gavel. And it was a time when technology and the space race was happening, and we couldn't do things. Even though the public demanded that we go to space, it wasn't possible. I was at Mission Control when Edgar Mitchell went to in 1971, and remember the countdowns that they have: 5, 4, 3. The reason they had those countdowns is just before the ignition, they have to punch a hole in the Van Allen belt in order to get a craft through there safely. And that's one of the reasons why the precision was so critical. And they have all those people because there's no possible way that anybody can go through the Van Allen belt without terminating their life. We don't, or didn't have at that time anyway, any kind of screening that would screen gamma rays and high energy particles. Just wasn't possible. And up there, it's toasty. And now with Lockheed doing the space fence, I have to tell you, we're bringing that physical technology. 5G, there is no 6G because there is nothing smaller than 5G. That is like 1.4 nanometers. And, that's like just the size of a water molecule. Certain atoms are way larger. We have no kind of way to screen anything with that bandwidth. And with that said, there may be something now that's a different direction in technology, but that would require either an avatar or some kind of a gate of some kind of, like a Stargate or something, where you could tunnel through that thing without being exposed to that part of space. Nothing can go from Earth to Mars and make it safely. It's not possible. And that's that. Even with high-end technology, you can't screen those kinds of gamma rays. And then to have someone like Lockheed want to put the space fence around the surface of the Earth. Right now, we're watching insects and how it's affecting insects on a smaller scale. In the Midwest, the cow pies don't have flies on them anymore, and the anthills are dead. Now, the bumblebee, that's the bandwidth that they use to navigate. And it confuses them to the point where it's killing the bees because they have no way of navigation. And I am extremely concerned with why they would be wanting to pursue these kinds of technologies when it's like nuclear energy. Do you know that a grid down situation in the Midwest with the New Madrid fault line, there are 21 Daiichi-like reactors, GE reactors on the New Madrid fault line. They're all leaking, and it takes a full year to power one down. You don't have 20 minutes to turn the switch off. It takes time. And basically, if we have a grid down situation, and basically you can count on that, no matter what happens, whether it be a pandemic, a bunch of teenagers in Pakistan playing with hacking, or whatever, you can count on a grid down situation shortly because everything is broken now, including Skype, your telephone, your television, all of it. You're noticing aberrances in all that technology because basically Google and Apple, as AIs, are at war with a different AI system, probably the dark web. The dark web's at war with a da-da-da-da-da. And now we have a bunch of hackers doing beta tests with things like handshakes to PayPal and WordPress loaded with code. It's all, everything is breaking down.
Yeah, I don't really like the sound of that. However, one could make the case that when it comes down to it, our consciousness has the ability to overpower a lot of things, like the climate on planet Earth could easily be overpowered if we all put our minds together, or more specifically, I should say, our hearts together, because the heart always trumps the mind, and be able to control the weather like the Indians thought they could make it rain by beating drums and dancing. But we can actually make it simpler, just meditating in a large
I'm going to give you the formula on that. I made a discovery. I'm working with Oxford, some professor emeritus, regarding the microdosing of mushrooms and CBDs and that kind of thing. Basically, all of those are toxins. And when you take a toxin like mushrooms, psychedelic mushroom, your body, your brain, freaks out and creates a look-alike neurotransmitter that is very closely related. Now, what happens next is that neurotransmitter is a resonant cavity oscillator that dialogues with subtle bodies that are closer to the physical world than chi. And what you're doing is taking allotropic medicine, which has placebo at 10%, and now you are using the mind's eye, and placebo can be raised to as much as 60%. Now, kumbaya and a bunch of bubblehead hippies out there, meditating on the goodness of Earth is not going to work. But this is a theorem that is written in stone. Man has a responsibility for the thoughts he chooses to entertain. And once you get that and begin training the mind, as all saints in history have stressed the importance of meditation, basically altered states of consciousness, and there's a bunch of different ones, the laws of physics change as a metaphor. And what I'm trying to do now is an ontology mapping where one begins and the other stops. And over here, your ability in guessing is 400 times over statistical inference with consciousness. Consciousness itself is a dream state. It's not real. And basically, at the moment of death, there is a 5-gram weight loss in every human being. What is that? It is structured water inside a microtubule. And when you realize that structured water basically has memory that is 1,000,000 times more efficient than gallium and arsenic, forming the forbidden zone, or gallium arsenide as your computer chip, you now can justify the existence of at least 10,000 lives in past lives of memory as a metaphor. Basically, the Bordeaux-Stadol covers that very clearly when it states at the moment of death, you have a choice between the tunnel of light or the blue light. The blue light is getting off the wheel and going back to the Lord. And the tunnel of light reminds me of a birth canal, a metaphor.
Well, that whole thing about the light, for those that hear about this and don't know whether they're supposed to come to the light or not, the general consensus seems to be just ignore the light and realize you are everything, you are infinite, and ignore the light and say, I'm ready to join source. So, but you're actually saying it's more complicated than that, and that there's more than one light. And
Oh, there's the choice. This is Bordeaux-Stadol. I'm not saying it's real or not, because space and time are not real. Physics does not have the answers. Basically, when I ask you what the color of that fence is over there, you say, oh, it's brown. You are making an assumption because you can't see the other side of the fence. And so all physics starts with assumed truths before they get even into definitions. And one of them, which is a metaphor again, is the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. When you make that assumption, you can prove the Earth is round. But if you say that space is curved, I can, with tensor physics, prove the Earth is flat. Now, which is it? Is it flat or round? And the correct answer is yes, because when you look at it as flat, there are certain doors that are available to you. And when you look at it as round, you have the choice of other doors. And what that's suggesting is that you have a choice, and imagination is reality.
Okay, so from that standpoint, flat Earth poster boy Santos Bonacci hasn't lost his marbles. So
no, it's just where do you want to go with flat Earth? You know, I saw this wonderful cartoon that showed all the planets, and then it showed a flat Earth, and they said, "What's wrong with this picture?" Well, you can't have it both ways. It's this way or it's that way. A curved space is now what we call tunneling, event horizons, and precursor waves in solid state physics. And so we now have a model that space is curved. But space and time are not real constructs. They're constructs in our mind's eye. And when you realize that dolphin, orca, pilot whale, and manatee all have larger brain cases, and the orca has a cerebral cortex that's twice the size of man, and that mammal is firing 60% of it, that mammal is conceptually going places man can't even comprehend. Now, we are part of a food chain, if you will. Bob Dylan said it best. Everybody's got to serve somebody. And even when you go into the old Bibles and look at the tree of life, there is above Kether, God, is the veils of Isis, Ein, Ein Sof, and Ein Sof Ur. And so it is a hierarchy of things going on, and basically, man is neither religious nor physics. He's Malcolm in the middle. And basically, it's not Malcolm anymore. It's more like Malcoma. People don't have a clue, but consciousness is not real. It is a dream state of which, when you're waking up in lucid dreaming, just as you're waking up, that place actually has more content to reality than consciousness does. And many of the more primitive tribes that have been here a long time relate to that in that regard and have no illusions like you or I do, thinking that this is only this. Just in this conversation, the audience that's listening to me, have all of you probably gone into at least 6 or 7 different altered states, where in each one of those, the laws of physics changed.
Now, when I hear this thing about the laws of physics changing, or that the laws of physics, specifically Newtonian, is, well, some people say there's two ways of looking at it, either using the word wrong, they're wrong, or some say no, wrong is such a strong word, that's not the word you should be using. A more appropriate one would be they don't really tell the whole entire story, they exist at some
Exactly. Yeah,
suppressed form.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
exactly, well, the one issue with this that a lot of people may want to wrestle their heads around is if the laws of physics are, well, not exactly true, if that makes more sense, then does that mean that the among other people, the 9/11 truth movement should be spinning and freaking out of their minds, because that means that all the laws of physics that they've used to show that the official story of 9/11 is a lie, well, it's meaningless because the laws of physics are mistaken. And well, I've always tried to say no, 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 no. All the 9/11 truthers, you can rest easy. The way to understand this is that the forces that executed 9/11, irregardless of whether they were pissed off Muslims or forces within the control system of planet Earth, that control system or pissed off Muslims, they themselves would be bound by the 3D matrix that we're in, which means that they themselves would be bound by the laws of physics, which means that they could not have violated the laws of physics in executing 9/11. So that means 9/11 truthers can still use the laws of physics to show that 9/11 was a lie and don't have to stress out when they hear people like you say the laws of physics are mistaken. Is that
Basically, physics today is the leading religion of the world. And your upper brain, the one you call the mind, is there to make all your beliefs true. It's a tool. It's not absolute. Belief systems are arbitrary. That was one of the primary uh, uh, protocols. I trained Navy SEALs that to change a belief system. If you went into Iraq as a Christian, you could get your team killed. Now, with that said, it didn't mean you get rid of your Christian belief. Like a sweater during the heat of summer, you fold it up and neatly put it into a drawer to be used in a more appropriate, colder situation. Now, as a metaphor, and metaphor is Gregory Bateson when he said, "What is your metaphor but to serve your paradox?" And our way of chunking from one system to the next, what we call memes, is quite different than cetacean, for example. The dolphin, for example, that are not as intelligent as orca. In fact, their language of clicks and whistles is a form of Clifford algebra, dimensional math. Their redundancy coefficient is 10 times more efficient than Hebrew. Now, with that, that was when Carl Sagan took me into John Lilly's labs in Berkeley, way back when. I am an idiot savant form. I do code, and I found that the dolphin's language is actually valid. I mean, and the whale sings songs like Enemy Mine on their history to their children. These are the whale songs that are going. There's a metaphor going on here. Man is not the center of it. And there's something more going on here, and we haven't got the big picture yet. We're in a dream state, and it's time to start training the mind.
Yes, and with that being said, training the mind and also training the heart too, I want to get into one of the more debatable issues about how technology and consciousness can work together, or for that matter, is it really necessary to have technology if we can have consciousness? David Icke has recently coming out saying that he thinks 2030 is basically the year that the Terminator movies will basically come to truth. Although the Terminator movies there on a negative timeline with the machines taking over, it's going to be more positive timeline, like he asserts. Interesting how he picks 2030. In the first Terminator movie, 2029 was the year that the Terminator went from to go back in time to murder Sarah Connor. And I can't help but wonder if the movie makers knew people at DARPA who looked into the future and saw that, and that got the inspiration for the movie. Now, but that's kind of beside the point. The point is, if we are to merge with machines in a little over a decade, does that mean that, well, the machines, we're going to work with them and our consciousness? Or, I mean, some people say like the more
If
consciousness.
if time is not real, it's a duration of consciousness, then I could make an argument that AIs are the alien invasion. And Kurzweil, talking about the singularity, is the taking over of human and making them into something different. Now, what makes us uniquely different than a machine is the algorithm. And there hasn't been an algorithm that allows a computer to, quote, be better than us in that Russian series on Netflix. However, a computer right now is being used in Chicago, a third wave D-wave generator, D-wave technology, is being used in Chicago to predict a crime 28 minutes before it occurs in a given borough. Now, there is your so-called, place where a algorithm can actually calculate what you're going to do before you even are aware of it consciously. However, there is a distinction between purpose and intent. Intent is actually what happens at the end of the day, based on you responding from your diversities of wounds. Wounds are actually blessings from the Lord that distinguish you as an individual distinct from me. If you are able to use that wound as a tool, now you approach being purpose. Now, purpose is not a destination. It is a journey. It means Simon says you can go halfway to the door, and you never really, with that protocol or algorithm, reach the door. It's about the journey, not the door. And it was Aleister Crowley that said, when you're doing your true will, you're doing your purpose. None shall say nay. That means algorithms cannot identify you. You are basically invisible. You're not in conflict with anything. That is the distinction between intent and purpose. And what we're trying to do is move from the one to the other. And that's where you have choice to see your wound as a blessing. When I have anger, what a perfect demon to use to wash a kitchen floor. That's how Faust did it with Mephistopheles as a metaphor.
That's an interesting way of looking at it, using anger to help me clean a kitchen floor. I've always said that I like to be mad, but I don't use my anger to hurt other people. When I say I like being mad, it's not like being mad at other people.
You're
like
using it as a tool, a unique tool. Yes,
to help beat the control system, and I don't see anything wrong with that. Yeah.
If you go back into the Appendices and the Greater Keys of Solomon, written by Solomon the King, and your first book of magics that dealt with angels and demons and the Lemegeton and the 72 fallen, I taught demonology at Georgetown as a graduate level course. And basically, I identified 68 of the 72 Lemegeton from Babylonian star maps as qualities in man deemed unworthy, like jealousy, rage, anger, and so on. And these were qualities that in psychology are called the shadow. The projection of the shadow is a projection of you onto the ground as a lesser dimensioned part of yourself. And these tools or limitations or blessings allow you to do things someone else can't, if you are able to take it from a glass half empty and use it as a glass half full, going from a wound into a tool, like you're aspiring toward. You never get there perfectly. Well, maybe a saint might, a fifth plane mystic might. I don't know about that. What I do know is, in myself, I watch how I manage my internal um, elements, if you will. And that's why man has a responsibility for the thoughts he chooses to entertain. That is written in stone. And those thoughts are what project out into matter and become your so-called conscious reality, of which you have probably 10,000 or more matrix examples of going back and trying to get it right as a metaphor. The Buddhists, the Tibetan Buddhists, they're Bordeaux Thadal. My guess is, as a metaphor, that crashed spaceship on the other side of the moon is most likely Buddhist from a previous epoch. We have been here before. I remember being down in Popo and watching them extract the Clovis culture, which is a city much larger than New York City. They had spaceflight, and that culture crawled out of a cave to become the Hopi.
Hopi are a fascinating tribe. But getting back to a statement you said earlier, glass half empty, glass half full. When it comes to getting through life, the glass half full attitude will certainly get you far. And I bring that up because I find myself using that phrase a lot often whenever I talk about the issue of contradictions in astrological and numerological readings. It seems like something you're bound to run across if you follow like Western astrology and Chinese zodiac astrology and also numerology. At some point or another, you're going to run into a horoscope that contradicts the other horoscope. And whenever you see something like that, I've asked, is there any general protocol for how to handle a contradiction in your horoscope, or like?
Well, yeah. I'm gonna run it down to you. You can talk about it as tendencies for this kind of behavior to work in this direction over that, because you're coming from it as a place of wounding. Because of tendencies, you can use the Hora forms of astrology. It started with astrology, evolved into astronomy, and then in the 70s, they called it cosmobiology. And cosmobiology came out, not Russia. Russia back in the 70s was a bunch of superstitious BS. But Prague had some very high-end physics that we have not even begun to understand even today. Dr. Milan Riesel is the one that put me on to hypnosis and using self-hypnosis for ESP, thinking with the gut, getting closer to spirit, and working with the first brain, which is the enteric nervous system. That is a hierarchy of resonant cavity oscillators, just like the brain is an amorphous semiconductor. The brain, as we call it, is actually a liquid crystal, and that means it's a four-dimensional hologram of five space. And while most meditation processes try to go toward the bliss states, which is Persinger and those studies, there are other studies where you go to different places in the brain and other phenomena occur, which means that if you learn how to navigate different places in the brain, you can literally change the movie. There is one example called the Wernicke correction down near the reticular activating center. That when you take anyone cross-culturally, Chinese, Arab, African, whatever, and you hypnotize them and take them to that part of the brain, we all have memory of working on Mars. How does that work? Is that archetypal? I don't know. I can tell you we don't have the words, the concepts of this yet. And that's how limited man really is, thinking we're superior with our physics.
Well, you mentioned Mars, and I heard you also mention that thing about the moon. And well, you say we're having problems with our physics. Well, if what I've heard about the Mars and the moon is true, maybe our physics abilities can improve on Earth, among other things. It seems a lot has changed since I first started doing the show. Back in the day, when I first started doing the show, I'd often point out how planet Mars is essentially in a coma, but now it's not in a coma anymore. That's not me talking. That's Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartz is talking. And recently, I've been hearing some people, among others, Brad Johnson, who channels Adronis, saying that the moon is no longer controlled by malevolent forces. The problem is we still have to put Humpty Dumpty together after the bad guys have been removed there, so it
And
might take some time. But
cosmobiology, though, that was Janev's work out of Yugoslavia when he wrote a book called The Lunar Sex Cycle of the Female. And when the female is born, there's an ovulation cycle. It's a biological clock that's set in a woman with a certain phase of the moon, Earth, and Sun is when she ovulates, which means it changes if she moves to a different part of Earth. And actually, the one I did, this study, was that the planet Uranus, when Uranus is in a certain geometric alignment with the Earth and the Sun, there was a 3 sigma error coefficient of a major earthquake on Earth. And there are no known laws on how Uranus can affect the Earth in that geometric alignment. And basically, the metaphor would be that when the storm on Jupiter is a metaphor for something happening in the base of mankind. And that space, as we construct and understand it, is something quite different than what we think it is. And that would mean that planets and the relationship of space and time and objects are not what we think. And that was the foundation of cosmobiology that had come out of astronomy.
yeah, thank you. And regarding what you said about space and time not being what we think, interestingly, how makes me think of something that Nassim Haramein has opened up a lot of eyes and made a lot of jaws drop with his assertion that we've totally failed to understand the implications behind the double slit experiment. It's not that he asserts, it's not that observing it is what changes the particle and the wave and vice versa. What is really going on is that your consciousness is interacting with the particles and waves.
Bongo, that is
Regardless.
absolutely good for you. That is exactly correct. That is the new direction in advanced forms of physics. They are suggesting that magic is an art form, like sculpting or painting, that the truth is different for each of us. And they used to call me Fox Mulder, and they said that in the TV series that the truth is out there, and that is not correct. The truth is inside you, and it's different for each of us. And that's what made us God's favorite, the diversity of possibilities.
Yeah, and it of course is a point of view issue, to quote Obi-Wan Kenobi when Luke Skywalker asked him, "Why'd you lie to me and say Vader murdered my father?" And Kenobi said, "No, no, that's true from a certain point of view, and truths depend on your point of view." And then, but of course, the close-minded people, like my own father, among others, would say, "Well, that's a stupid way of looking at it in real life, because there has to be some isness way that it is, irregardless of your point of view." Okay,
When I
well,
taught, when I taught shamanism at Evergreen, I was first faculty at Evergreen in Olympia, Washington. We wrote a screenplay that won Best Picture of the Year in Cannes. It was a half-hour short on biofeedback, and the title was "Eat the Sun, and Then You Will Be Your Own Father." Isn't that interesting? The play of words and the imagery that it portrays inside. That's why Hollywood was why the wand was made out of holly, because once you see it in your mind's eye, that's what makes it real.
Right. Eat the Sun. You mentioned Eat the Sun. That's not to be confused with the Eat the Sun sun gazing documentary where HRM was caught eating, suggesting that he's been lying since being free from food since 1995. But since I mentioned that, one thing, sun gazing is one of those things that I cannot stop but have a field day with because it's even people that have said one thing have eventually said something else. I mean, Andrew Bartzis, my number one source of info because I love his Akashic reading skills as being a great source of information. I distinctly remember him saying back in the day in some, I think it was 2015, summer solstice period, he said, get some sun gazing in, literally look at the sun. The system tells you to go blind, but in reality, the electromagnetic sun, which is electromagnetic, not nuclear fusion, will actually allow you, it'll bypass your physical and go straight to your brain to heal you and neutralize everything out of balance in your body for the better. And when he was asked um, by Daniel Lynn, who was guiding the interview, she said, "Is there a set time when you're supposed to sun gaze?" And he said, "It begins whenever you get up. If you want to do it early in the morning, great. If you're a late night owl that gets up at 2 in the afternoon, then you can do it then." Anybody listening to that would have interpreted that as meaning you can look at the sun with open eyes and it's perfectly safe. However, when I did a private session with him, he actually told me if you're going to do sun gazing outside of the 45 to an hour minute window during sunrise and sunset, you're actually supposed to do it with the eyes closed because it could cause damage. And I'm like, what?
Well,
That's
that's
not what you
exactly
said
right.
when.
Yeah.
Uh,
The
oh,
sun right now is toxic. Right now, there's the UVBs and UVCs that are hitting the surface of the soil all the way down through the Van Allen belt. And you can't be out in the sun longer than an hour now without getting burned. The radiation during the solar minimum is what's causing the variation on the planet Earth right now.
okay. Well, you
The
say you can't
solar
be out
minimum.
the sun without being burned. Well, okay, I've heard differences on what suntan and
Well, it's
sun.
CB, it's your long ultraviolet is getting through. This solar minimum is extremely toxic. I remember a time when our sun was yellow.
Right. But about getting burned by the sun. It's been said that suntan is not what we're led to believe it is. Suntan is actually your body's toxins being brought to the surface by sunlight, and I can certainly believe that, considering that when I became a nature lover around 2012, 2013, 2014, spent a lot of time in the sun, I got the craziest tan ever. Some people thought I was of a dark-skinned race, but ever since then, I barely get a tan when I'm out in the sun, and the simple answer as to why that's the case is because when I got that huge tan half a decade ago, all the toxins were brought out, and since I've been consistently going out in the sun, there's nothing for it to come out. Now that raises the question: okay, well, suntan's good for us, but what about sunburn? What is sunburn? Well, sunburn apparently is, I think it's just your body's way of saying overload, overload, you're getting too much of a good thing and I can't take it anymore. Even a good thing like the sun is bad for you if you do it a lot. You got to stop at this point, and I'm turning red to let you know that you're getting too much of it. Is that probably an accurate way of what sunburn
Well,
actually is?
for me, I'm more pragmatic and I'm English. I have to be very careful going into the sun or I get hurt. My skin. And the bottom line is you can't see some of the bandwidths that are actually present now that were not present when you and I were a boy. It's changed. And
Yes.
because of that change, there's, considerations like water, drinking the water. You can't just drink the water because you see a free flowing stream anymore. Some animal could have committed suicide up north above it and got full of coliform toxin. It's not the earth that I remember.
Well, on that note, I listened to an interview of Cryon. Cryon, love listening to his wisdom. He actually said that any pollution that humanity does to the earth has the ability to heal thyself, like Wolverine from the X-Men, and any damage we do to it will affect us, the human species, and well, the animals as well, of course, and the plants too. But Earth will eventually be able to heal itself, regardless of how much pollution we we do as a human species. Do you agree or disagree that the Earth is basically like Wolverine from the X-Men, and only we humans are going to hurt ourselves
I
if we?
love comic books. I love comic books. I followed more Doctor Strange and Doctor Who and who was it? Oh yes, Doc Savage. Those kinds of things in the comics that I collected. Warlock. Warlock was one of my most favorite ones. I have to say, I don't know. I can tell you that if I look at it this way, that this is certain realities that are available to me, and if I look at it that way, I have those realities. And I can tell you that when I look at it this way, there are realities I don't want to have participation in. And when I look at it that way, so I become two-faced. I'm of two minds of this. I'll flip a coin. I don't know. I don't
Neither
know.
do I, but it makes for good radio conversation.
Oh,
And
well, makes people start to think for themselves.
exactly. And in regards to our future here on Earth, to an extreme level, it's actually been said by some that we're definitely going to be heading for an ice age. And one of the evidence for that is Earth, the planets Saturn and Jupiter are actually going to be like lining up with the Earth in the not too distant future, causing the Earth to move out farther from the sun, which some will say will put us into a mini ice age. But that kind of flies in the face of what I've asserted earlier in this interview, that we have the ability to correct the climate with our own consciousness here on Earth, which I can't help but side with the latter because, well, among other things, all the say what you want about ET contactees, whether they're out of their minds or being manipulated or whatnot. One general consensus seems to be that the aliens that communicate with them, they all come from higher levels of consciousness, and the planets they come from, they all seem to have a very, very temperate climate where it gets no hotter than 75 during the day and no colder than 62 degrees at night, and there's basically no seasons year round, and there's always a balance of rain and all, no droughts, and it's because their consciousness is able to overpower how far they are from their own planet, among other things.
I can give you an interesting closing metaphor. You're going to love this one.
Mm-hmm.
So the Jet Propulsion Laboratory guy says Nibiru's infrared signature, IR signature, is wrong. And his colleague said, yeah, maybe it's got a Dyson sphere around it. And then I said, yeah, it's our future coming to collect the rent. We didn't start here on Earth.
Right. We start on Lyra. That's where humans are said to have come from. Lyra. Which I guess makes sense, seeing that I did a show once when I couldn't get a guest on characteristics of ET races. The Lyra star system, according to that article, had the most ET races of all the star systems. And if you buy into what Alex Collier said about the reason the ETs are so interested in us here on Earth is because we're genetic royalty, well, it stands to reason that the Lyra system where humans originated would have the greatest hodgepodge of different races. Makes sense, doesn't it?
Fun with you, Andrew. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. So, well, we've still got 7 minutes. I don't really know what questions to ask you at this point, so might as well give you the chance to now get out anything that you'd like to get out, what you see for the future, what speaking appearances you're going to make, get out your contact info again.
I think that we are on a precipice for an opportunity to change the movie in a single moment. And my newest book that will be coming out is The Non-Local Mind in a Holographic Universe. And right behind that, I have another book coming out before Christmas called The Magical and Ritual Use of Metaphor, Archetypal Gods in Daily Living. The Greek basic pantheon basically had 22 stories in the big city. It's a book on tarot. And you are either possessed, which means you have only one story going on, or you're complexed. You have more than one storyboard going on. And if you can identify what stories are going on inside you, the wounds that you have, You now have how they're going to end. And if you don't like those endings, that's what pathworking is about, changing the movie. And that's why the advanced forms of physics now are moving toward the study of magic and the use of altered states of consciousness as tools in a toolbox.
Yes, Arthur C. Clarke knew what he was talking about when he said magic and higher level technology are indistinguishable. That's not the exact quote, but I'm not taking it out of context when I say that. So, thank you for pointing that out, and also your books. Can't help but be envious of you. I wish I could be an author. I mean, I'm more of a radio host, but I kind of want to be
Well,
an
you're
author. There's
doing it. You're doing your
right,
part that's helping my footprint and your footprint, and together you and I are leaving footprints for the new radio and the new books.
right, but you can't deny that a book is a better medium of information than a radio show is. And
I disagree.
really,
I disagree. I think that what you're doing is as important as what I'm doing.
All right, one's not more or less important.
How would they find out about me without you?
That's a good point. And on that note, something I want to bring up. I remember the last time we spoke when you were on my show. You said we got to get you onto some other mediums, Andrew. You're definitely worthy of having more than one show. Well, I don't want the world to like revolve around me or anything, or you to dedicate your life to me. You got other things to worry about. But if you know of any way that you can actually help me with that, by all means. I mean, I recently attended a conference by Brendan Bouchard to try to learn how to monetize my work and all, but on the other hand, it's going to really suck if I have to tell all of my radio audience listeners you're going to have to pay me to listen to my show from now on. I really don't want to do that, but at the same time, it would be really nice if I could exit the AAA matrix and make it to the major leagues at the high consciousness level by finding a way to quit my 9-to-5 day job and find a way to monetize
this interview will be one of those cracks, because it was a good friend of mine that once said, everything is broken. That's how the light gets in.
Right. And a lot of darkness that we see is not, in the words of Sai Baba, it's not darkness. It's light. It's just stuff that has to come out for us to wake up out of the trance and the slumber.
Thank you for having me again, Andrew.
And thank you for coming on. Like I said, having guests the second time on the show is a rarity, but anyone listening, you're more than welcome to reach out again. If you really want to come on again, I'm more than welcome to do you that favor, like I did for Dr. Miller. So, pleasure having you on. Take care, and good luck with those books that you're writing, and maybe I'll...
Good luck with those shows you're doing. Yeah. If you give me this recording, I will post it far and wide, and you'll be surprised at how patrons abound.
Yes, I could use a bigger audience. People have lousy attention spans, and doing 2-hour shows has cost me a potentially big audience. This is only an hour, so it's not as bad. But if you can help me with that, that would be most appreciated. So I will do that. Upload it hopefully by tonight, or midnight tomorrow at the absolute latest.
Nice,
take care, Doctor.
Yeah, nice working with you too, sir.
All right, take care.